30 years ago, Alan Hansen uttered these immortal words about Manchester United.
So he needs to buy players. You can't win anything with kids.
The Red Devils had just lost their opening game of the 1995-96 season 3-1 against Aston Villa, and Hansen was referring to the 4 academy graduates in the club's starting 11. Gary Neville, Phil Neville, Nicky Butt and Paul Scholes all started the game, aged 18 to 20 at the time. Meanwhile, a 20-year-old David Beckham was introduced from the bench. As it transpired, they all turned out to be half-decent players, and Fergie's fledglings went on to win a Premier League and FA Cup double that season, beginning a run of 5 Premier League titles in 6 seasons, including a historic treble in 1999. You could then, it seemed, win something with kids. Quite a lot, in fact. And football pundits have been reluctant to question the age composition of squads for the last 3 decades as a result. Except that Manchester United team wasn't actually that young. The so-called class of 92 were, of course, but there was also Peter Schmeichel, Paul Parker, Steve Bruce and Gary Pallister, all in their 30s, Dennis Irwin and Eric Cantona were both 29, and the likes of Roy Keane, Andy Cole and Lee Sharp were all in their mid-20s. The average age, even of the Manchester United team that faced Aston Villa on the opening day of the season, was 25.3. That is older than the average age of the Manchester United lineup this season. There is a team that is genuinely made up of kids, that is flying high in European football right now though, and that is RC Strasbourg. The youngest team in one of Europe's Big 5 leagues, not just this season but of all time. The average age of the Strasbourg squad this season is just 21.4. That is a full 2 years younger than the next youngest Ligue 1 squad, PSG, which is itself younger than the youngest Premier League squad, namely Chelsea. Outside of 25-year-old goalkeeper George Petrovic, who is on loan at Strasbourg from Chelsea, of the 18 players who have played the most minutes for Strasbourg this season, the next oldest player is just 22. And yet, Strasbourg have gone from finishing 13th last season, just 3 places above the relegation zone under Patrick Vieira, and 15th the season before that, to sitting pretty in 6th at the time of this recording as the informed team in Ligue 1, having just beat Champions League finalists and title winners PSG, and in contention to qualify for the Champions League themselves next season for the first time in 45 years. All of this at a club that was liquidated and administratively relegated to the 5th tier of French football at the end of the 2010-11 season, and appeared to be a lost cause. But just how has it happened? What is the secret sauce behind Strasbourg's success? And how does it feel to watch Liam Rosenior beat PSG and possibly take a team into the Champions League after Hull City sacked him only to fall from finishing 7th last season, just outside of the playoff places, to only avoiding relegation to League 1 this season on goal difference? Well, those are questions, especially the last one, that I get asked to make a video about on a daily basis. The last by those of you who presumably just like to see grown men cry. So today, with our survival at least confirmed, if nothing else, that's what we're going to do. So sit back, relax, and join me on a journey to Strasbourg, one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities in Europe, and one of the 4 de facto capitals of the European Union, as we take a look at how a French football club on the German border has risen from total collapse to potential Champions League football in the space of just 14 years, how Europe's youngest squad, guided by a young and inexperienced manager, are upsetting the apple cart of French football, and what all of it means for Strasbourg's sister club Chelsea, with whom they share a controversial multi-club ownership regime. French football is an endless tale of booms and busts. Even the country's biggest clubs, like Marseille or Saint Etienne, have been racked by numerous relegations, scandals, and financial crises. Bordeaux, who sit 3rd in the all-time Ligue 1 table, gave up their professional licence and were administratively relegated to the 4th tier ahead of the start of this season. At the start of the 1980s, Saint Etienne, who were then the most successful club in French football, saw their reign of dominance brought to an abrupt end by a financial scandal that saw their president jailed and ultimately the club relegated. And in the same season that Marseille became the first and As things stand, the only French club to win the Champions League, they were stripped of their Ligue 1 title owing to a match-fixing and bribery scandal, also administratively relegated, and their president was also jailed. Even the French national team seems to suffer from a similar form of bipolar disorder, bouncing, on multiple occasions, between World Cup finals and humiliating group stage exits, and mired by infighting, blackmail, and sex scandals. This is, if you like, French football heritage. Even within this context, Racing Club de Strasbourg's history could accurately be described as turbulent. Though they are one of only 6 clubs to have won the 3 historic major domestic trophies in French football, namely the National Championship, the Coupe de France, and the Coupe de la Ligue, as well as being one of only 6 clubs to have played more than 2,000 games in Ligue 1, Strasbourg have also tasted relegation at least once a decade, every decade, since the early 1950s. They haven't even always been a French club. Older than London, Paris, or St. Petersburg, Strasbourg has been a continuously inhabited population centre for more than 2,000 years. Conquered by Caesar, Julius that is, not the salad, the Gallics, the Franks, and the French, Strasbourg, and the whole of Alsace, was conquered by the German Empire during the Franco-Prussian War at the start of the 1870s. Strasbourg, therefore, who were founded in 1906 as Fußball Club Neudorf, were founded as a German club and actually played their first ever match against a team called FC Germania. They forfeited that game at half-time when they were losing 7-0. It wasn't a great start. Better times were to come for Strasbourg, though. One of many interesting facts about the club is that, to this day, they still hold the record for the second largest win in the history of German football, having won 28-0 against a club called Erstein, despite, now being French. Shortly before the outbreak of World War I, Neudorf won a double promotion and moved to the site that still hosts the club's home ground, more than 100 years on. As any history buffs will know, World War I didn't end very well for the German Empire. In fact, it went so not well that by 1918, it no longer existed. In the Treaty of Versailles, Germany lost an amount of land roughly equivalent in size to modern-day Belgium and the Netherlands combined, which included Alsace and Lorraine. Strasbourg, therefore, became part of France again, and the club changed their name from a German to a French one to recognise that fact, becoming Racing Club de Strasbourg. It wasn't until the 1933-34 season that Strasbourg elected to become a professional club, joining the newly formed Ligue 2 and winning promotion in their debut campaign. Following only 5 seasons competing in Ligue 1 though, just their luck, along came the Germans once again. Some bloke called Hitler didn't think too much of the Treaty of Versailles, so he decided that Germany should lose another world war in which 75 million people were killed. This is the first time that I'm hearing about this guy through the lens of Racing Club de Strasbourg's turbulent past, but I've got to say, having just vaguely skimmed his Wikipedia page, he seems extremely problematic. In the time being, before Germany surrendered again and Hitler blew his own brains out, Strasbourg became a German club once again, inventively renamed Rasenball Sport Club Strasbourg, and entered into the Gauliga Alsace alongside other clubs from Alsace. The Gauliga Alsace was dominated by Strasbourg's biggest rivals during this period, a club which was called SS Strasbourg, who were associated with the Nazis' genocidal paramilitary group, the SS, and were, unsurprisingly, disbanded at the end of the war. It just wasn't a very good look anymore. I promise you, we will get on to Liam Rosenior soon. At the end of the war, Alsace came back under French control and, for a third time, Strasbourg changed name, nationality, and Football League pyramid. Coupe de France and Coupe de la Ligue winners in the mid-1960s, Strasbourg's crowning moment came in the late 1970s when, in only their second season back in the top flight, they won their first and only French championship and were welcomed home by 200,000 adoring Alsatians at Strasbourg Station. Alsatians as in people from Alsace, not 200,000 German Shepherds, a breed of dog also known as Alsatians in the UK, although, admittedly, that would have been a much cuter spectacle. Every great success was followed by crushing failure though. The season after Strasbourg won their first Coupe de France title in 1951, they were relegated to Ligue 2. Within 5 years of winning it for a second time in 1966, they had been relegated again. And when they won their last Coupe de France crown in 2001, they were relegated from Ligue 1 in the very same season. Likewise, after Strasbourg won their third Coupe de la Ligue crown in 2005, they were relegated the following season. The most devastating downturn of all, though, came in the late 2000s. Following ill-fated American and German ownership regimes, Strasbourg were relegated to the third tier of French football for the first time in 2010. Despite finishing fourth the following season, Strasbourg were expelled from the Championnat National and liquidated by the commercial courts owing to unsustainable debts, forcing them to be refounded in the fifth tier. This would be the equivalent of a club the size of Newcastle or Wolves in England being liquidated and forced to start out again in the National League. Except, it is actually worse than that, since whereas the National League is an almost entirely professional nationwide league, France's fifth-tier Championnat de France Amateur 2, as the name suggests, is an entirely amateur league made up of 128 clubs competing in 8 separate groups of 16 teams in what is, in many cases, basically tantamount to park football. This was where Strasbourg, who had won the Coupe de la Ligue in front of almost 80,000 fans at the Stade de France just 6 years earlier, now found themselves competing. They won an instant promotion, at which point, former player Marc Keller led a consortium which acquired the club. Keller, who was born in Alsace, spent 5 years starring for Strasbourg, followed by stints at Karlsruhe, West Ham United, and briefly both Portsmouth and Blackburn Rovers. After retiring in 2002, Keller returned to Strasbourg as an executive, but he had left for Monaco when the proverbial really hit the fan and the club imploded. He returned as president with the modest support primarily of local businesses and business people. Strasbourg weren't rich, by any means, but they still had about the biggest fan base outside of Ligue 1, and Keller finally put the club on a strong and stable footing. Strasbourg's rise up through the divisions would be nothing short of remarkable. Within 6 seasons of being liquidated and relegated to the entirely amateur fifth tier, the club had won 4 promotions and were already back competing in the top flight. In their first season back in Ligue 2, Strasbourg won promotion as champions. The fact that all of this had been achieved by local executives and an Alsatian ownership structure, again, not the dog, only made it all the more special. Strasbourg won the penultimate Coupe de la Ligue in 2019 before the competition was scrapped owing to fixture congestion, adding a layer of gloss to their meteoric rise through a stunning cup run in which they overcame Lille, Marseille, Lyon and Bordeaux en route to the final. In the league, however, Strasbourg's modest resources saw them hit a mid-table ceiling. They finished 6th in 2022, the club's highest league finish for over 40 years, narrowly missing out on European qualification, but that came either side of a couple of relegation scraps, prompting Keller and his consortium to go out in search of investors. What Strasbourg's shareholders really wanted was minority investors, who would inject some much-needed funds into the club while allowing them to retain control, but few parties were forthcoming. It was at that point that Strasbourg came onto the radar of Blueco, the consortium led by Todd Boehly that acquired Chelsea from Roman Abramovich in, by far, the most expensive takeover in football history in 2022. Blueco and Boehly's plans have always been to build a multi-club ownership model in the style of Red Bull or the City Football Group, and before acquiring Strasbourg, they reportedly held talks with troubled Bordeaux, in addition to clubs in Belgium, Portugal, and in South America. Blueco refused to become minority investors though, insisting upon a full takeover, allowing Marc Keller to stay on as club president in order to push that deal through. In the end, to the immense displeasure of many Strasbourg supporters, Blueco completed a full takeover in a deal worth €75 million, so just 3% of what they paid for Chelsea, in June 2023. Many Strasbourg supporters, dare I say most, opposed the takeover for a number of valid reasons. Firstly, multi-club ownership models are understandably reviled by most football fans, especially those who support the non-apex club within those structures, and feel as though they are reduced to the status of being a B or even a C team, cannibalized by a bigger or richer club, and serving only to further enrich them and improve their fortunes. Secondly, because of their own unfavourable experience of American ownership under IMG in the late 90s and early 2000s, as well as the miserable experience of French clubs under American ownership as a whole, and thirdly and finally, because many Strasbourg fans were very happy with the progress that the club had made since being liquidated in 2011. Strasbourg's owners might have felt like they needed greater resources in order to compete and challenge for Europe, but many Strasbourg fans themselves were just glad to have a bit of sanity and stability at last. The club had just survived for a 6th successive season in Ligue 1 under a local and well-liked president and consortium, having risen from the 5th tier of the French game. Whilst they would have liked a title challenge or European adventure, who wouldn't? Having been burnt more than once in the past, Strasbourg fans had grave reservations regarding at what cost that fabled title challenge or European run might come at. As far as many, and again, I would go as far as to say most were concerned, this was a cost that was far too great. The fact that Troyes, owned by the City Football Group, had just been relegated from Ligue 1 whilst they survived didn't help matters, and immediately after the takeover was confirmed, Strasbourg supporters held a demonstration with banners reading "Bowley not welcome." Even this season, in spite of their on-pitch success, protests among Strasbourg supporters and particularly the club's ultras have persisted. Strasbourg fans have since displayed tifos reading "Blueco out" and "Non alla multipropriété", no to multi-club ownership in English, chanted in opposition to the club's owners, and staged 15 minutes of deathly silence during multiple games. As one Strasbourg supporter put it, quote, "We are slaves eating the master's leftovers." As part of Keller's consortium's agreement to sell the club, they demanded assurances that Strasbourg, who have revenue of €65 million and were bought for €75 million, would be treated as Chelsea's equals, who have revenue of over €500 million and were acquired for €3 billion, rather than as subsidiaries or as a feeder club. Those were assurances that Blueco provided, but it would be fair to say that many Strasbourg supporters aren't convinced. The fact that Chelsea agreed a deal to sign 19-year-old centre-back Mamadou Sarr, who has been one of Strasbourg's star players this season, for a reported fee of just €14 million, hasn't done a great deal to change many of their minds. In Blueco's first season in charge, like at Chelsea, Strasbourg smashed all of their previous spending records. A total outlay of €60 million might pale in comparison to Chelsea's spending, but it was more money in a single season than Strasbourg had spent in the preceding 15 years. The bulk of it, more than €50 million, went on 4 20-year-olds, none of whom performed in their debut campaigns, and one of whom has gone out on loan this season. Patrick Vieira, a man well versed in the world of multi-club ownership, was appointed as Strasbourg's new head coach by Blueco, but he departed by mutual consent after finishing 13th in his only season. Over the summer, Strasbourg spent a further €60 million, despite not raising a single euro in player sales, and Liam Rosenior replaced the departing Vieira. The same man, Lawrence Stewart, who was reportedly instrumental in Blueco acquiring Strasbourg, was also instrumental in bringing Rosenior to Alsace. Stewart, who was formerly a video analyst for Hull City while Rosenior was playing for the club, became the head of scouting for the entire Red Bull cinematic universe in 2018. Following 2 years in that job, he was appointed as a sporting and subsequently a technical director at Monaco, where he struck up a relationship with Strasbourg president Mark Keller. When Blueco appointed Stewart as a sporting director at Chelsea in early 2023, therefore, he was able to alert them to Keller and Strasbourg's search for investors, and when Vieira departed, Stewart was able to recommend Rosenior to Blueco. Stewart wasn't alone within the Blueco hierarchy in having a relationship with Rosenior. Paul Winstanley, Chelsea's sporting director, and Sam Jewell, who serves as Chelsea and Strasbourg's joint head of international relations and scouting, were both at Brighton at the same time as Rosenior. Rosenior retired at Brighton in 2018, having just turned 34, by which stage he had already held his UEFA Pro licence, the highest coaching qualification, for 2 years. He took up a role as the assistant manager of Brighton's under-23s at the time, which he combined with his work as a pundit, working underneath Chris Hughton and Graham Potter. There is an interesting symmetry in so many of Rosenior's experiences, whether that be the fact that Brighton and Tony Bloom also operated a multi-club ownership model, acquiring Belgian club Royal Union Saint-Gilloise at the same time that Rosenior moved into coaching, that he worked underneath Chris Hughton, one of the few black or mixed-race managers, like him, in English football, or that he worked briefly under Graham Potter, one of the few English managers to take a leap of faith into the unknown at an early age and work abroad, just as he would go on to do. Before that, Rosenior worked as a first-team coach under Philip Cocu and as an assistant to Wayne Rooney at Derby County during a period of extreme turmoil, almost akin to Strasbourg, at the start of the 2010s, in which Derby were also nearly liquidated and expelled from the EFL. When Derby were relegated from the Championship following a whopping 21-point deduction and Rooney departed, Rosenior took over as interim manager. He was dismissed, rather harshly, with Derby sat 7th in the League One table, the same position that they ended the season in, after replacing Rosenior with Paul Warne. Rosenior wasn't out of work for long though, as 6 weeks later, he joined his former club Hull City, who were just one place above the relegation zone in the Championship. Rosenior very quickly steadied the ship, turning the worst defence in the division into one of the best, grinding out results, and climbing up to 15th in the table, closer, in terms of points, to the playoffs than the relegation zone. The following season, aided by the arrival of Jayden Philogene from Aston Villa and a couple of excellent young loanees, Hull climbed all the way to 7th, finishing 1 place and 3 points outside of the Championship playoff places. In 18 months then, Rosenior had taken Hull from 1 place above the drop to 1 place outside of the playoffs, yet, just a month after making the 3-man shortlist for the Championship Manager of the Season award, Rosenior was sacked. This season, Hull finished 21st, 1 place, and level on points with the bottom 3 again. Unsurprisingly therefore, Rosenior wasn't short of job offers. He turned down interest from Championship clubs, including Sunderland, before Strasbourg came calling. In addition to his close contacts with several key figures at Chelsea and within Blueco, some of the best work that Rosenior did at Hull was in terms of nurturing young players. He transformed Jayden Philogene from a tricky winger into the most productive wide player in the Championship before he suffered an injury mid-season. He aided Jacob Greaves' development into being arguably the best centre-back in England outside of the top flight, and he played a key role in turning Liam Delap, who had plenty of doubters and critics following unsuccessful loan moves at both Stoke City and Preston North End, into the beast of a player that we have seen at Ipswich this season, seemingly sought after by all of the Big Six clubs, and being touted for an England call-up. That is something that is unlikely to have gone unnoticed by Blueco, given the extraordinary age composition of Strasbourg's squad, which I alluded to in the introduction. There are only 3 players in the Strasbourg squad who are over the age of 30, and they have played a grand total of 365 minutes of football this season. That is equivalent to 4 games of football between them, or 1.33 games each. The 17 outfield players who have played the most minutes for Strasbourg this season are all aged between 19 and 22, and even their first-choice goalkeeper, George Petrovic, on loan from Chelsea, is only 25. It makes Strasbourg by far the youngest squad and team in any of Europe's Big 5 leagues, and, as far as I can tell, the youngest team that any of those leagues have ever seen. That brings with it a unique set of challenges, in terms of a lack of experience both on and off the pitch, and a high propensity to make mistakes, which is inevitable among young players. But it also brings a unique set of opportunities. Young players also tend to be less set in their ways, more easily moulded, and more receptive to new ideas, which, when Liam Rosenior has a very distinct idea of how he wants his teams to play, is an asset that he has used to his advantage. As was the case at Hull City, Rosenior has transformed Strasbourg defensively. From 50 goals conceded last season, which wasn't a terrible record in respect of Strasbourg's 13th place finish, they have only conceded 39 this season, with 2 games remaining at the time of recording. In their last 12 games, in which Strasbourg have gone unbeaten, defeating the likes of Lens, Lyon and PSG, they have only conceded 7 goals. Statistically, Strasbourg's defence is among the best in Europe in 2025. Rosenior has deployed a different formation at Strasbourg, typically some variation of a 3-4-3 to the one that he did at Hull, usually a 4-2-3-1, but the fundamental principles remain unchanged. Aside from the usual buzzwords of aggression, hard work and intensity, Rosenior wants his team to press high up the pitch, not necessarily flying into tackles, but trying to force their opponents into making their own mistakes. That strategy is reflected in the underlying data, where Strasbourg have the highest percentage of presses on opposition touches in Ligue 1 at almost 70%, but the second fewest contested duels, behind Marseille, as per Opta data. Despite seeking to dominate possession, Strasbourg have only actually seen 49.5% possession on average this season, putting them roughly mid-table. Much of that possession, as at Hull, is short passes in Strasbourg's own half, with their goalkeeper and centre-backs taking more touches and making more passes than anyone else, as they attempt to bait the press, so to speak, pulling their opponents out of shape and then looking to exploit the gaps created in behind them. Not coincidentally, this is very similar to the way that Enzo Maresca sets his team up at Chelsea, except Strasbourg arguably, and somewhat ironically, have better players to implement it. At Hull, Rosenior signed Ryan Alsop, a ball-playing goalkeeper who he'd worked with at Derby, and he refused to drop him even when Alsop's shot-stopping came in for some criticism. This was eventually cited by Hull City owner Ajnil Ajala as one of the reasons why Rosenior was sacked, but the former fullback was willing to make allowances for occasional goalkeeping mishaps on the basis that Alsop was so confident on the ball in build-up and capable of launching attacks of his own with his distribution that he felt that he was a net benefit for the team. In George Petrovic, by contrast, Rosenior has got the best of both worlds. Outstanding this season, Rosenior recently described his goalkeeper as world-class, and it probably isn't any exaggeration to say that Chelsea's best goalkeeper is currently on loan with their sister club. Unlike Robert Sanchez, Petrovic has looked extremely assured with the ball at his feet this season, providing the springboard for all of Strasbourg's build-up. The defender who sees the most of the ball for Strasbourg is Gyula Doué. Versatile and adaptable, like a lot of Strasbourg players who Rosenior has shifted around positionally this season, Doué can play at centre-back, right-back, or even on the right of midfield. The older brother of PSG star Desiree Doué, though not much older at 22, Doué joined Strasbourg from Rennes last summer for just €6 million. He is now worth comfortably double, if not treble or quadruple that amount. Doué has the 7th most touches and the 8th most completed passes of any player in Ligue 1 this season. Curiously, before Strasbourg signed Doué, reputable Italian journalist Gianluca Di Marzio reported that Chelsea had agreed a deal to sign him and send him straight out on loan to Strasbourg. It seems probable, therefore, that for either accounting, regulatory or administrative purposes, Bluco felt it more appropriate to sign Doué via Strasbourg than via Chelsea. Strasbourg fans could be forgiven, however, for assuming that, based upon that settlement, if he builds upon his excellent debut campaign, he may very well follow in the footsteps of fellow centre-back Mamadou Sarr and join Strasbourg's de facto parent club on a permanent basis for a below-market value fee. Strasbourg's midfield, meanwhile, is flexible, typically operating with just one pivot, who is able to create a diamond, facilitating quick transitions and 1-2s once Rosenior's men manage to beat that press, but capable of switching easily into a solid bank of 2 in front of Strasbourg's back 3, and an effective low block of 7 when you add in the wing-backs. Left wing-back Diego Moreira, who was signed by Chelsea in 2023, but joined Strasbourg on a permanent basis in 2024, having only ever made a solitary appearance for Chelsea in the EFL Cup against Wimbledon, has been a revelation. A graduate of the Benfica youth ranks, Moreira is quick, skillful, and endlessly enthusiastic. He has attempted the 5th most take-ons of any player in Ligue 1 this season, ahead of PSG's Desiree Doué, and he has completed the 3rd most, chipping in with 2 goals and 7 assists in the league alone. The star of the show, undoubtedly however, has been another Chelsea loanee, Andrey Santos, at the heart of Strasbourg's midfield. Brought to Chelsea from Vasco da Gama with a sky-high reputation in Brazil in January 2023, Santos set the Blues back a reported £18 million, but he is yet to play for the club. An immediate return to Vasco was followed by an unsuccessful stint on loan at Nottingham Forest last season, in which Santos only registered 1 Premier League appearances and 2 in all competitions. Signed by Strasbourg on loan during the winter of last season, Rosenior has put Santos front and centre of his project in Alsace. Rosenior made Santos his captain, which is pretty much unheard of for a 20-year-old, let alone a 20-year-old loanee, but the Brazilian has repaid his faith in him tenfold. No one has attempted or completed more tackles in Ligue than Santos this season, despite the fact that he isn't an out-and-out midfield ball winner or enforcer, often performing more of a box-to-box role, and ranking in the top 10 percentile in terms of non-penalty expected goals among midfielders in Europe's Big 5 leagues this season, as well as the top 4 percentile in terms of actual non-penalty goals, having struck 9 times in Ligue 1 this season and 10 times in all competitions. Expected to go straight into the Chelsea squad, and most likely starting 11 next season, Santos' loan has been a roaring success. Blueco would cite it as evidence of the mutual benefit that their multi-club ownership model can provide, though one wonders how Strasbourg will cope with the loss of their best player, most influential player, and club captain next season as he returns to his parent club. Arguably more important than Rosenior's tactics is his man management with young players. Having worked as a pundit and been preparing to become a coach for such a long time, Rosenior is a polished speaker and very well media trained. At Hull, he would seemingly call every single opponent and opposing manager top, Rosenior's favourite word, in his pre-match press conference, even if the team in question were literally bottom of the league and their manager was on the verge of losing their job following 10 games without a win. His behind-the-scenes team talks and interactions with players likewise, much as I like Rosenior a lot and thought that he did an excellent job, were somewhat cliché-ridden and a little bit cringe-inducing to me. But then, they weren't for me. They were for a group of predominantly very young footballers, and a set of even younger ones this season, who lap it up and hung on to his every word. Personable and communicable, unlike a lot of modern managers, Rosenior wants a close personal bond with his players, and to create an environment in which they feel as though they can come to him with anything. When 20-year-old Argentine Valentin Barco, who is on loan at Strasbourg from Rosenior's former club Brighton this season, had his first child earlier in the campaign, Rosenior gave him 3 days off. In my view, that ought to be the bare minimum, but you would be surprised in football. It is these little gestures that create a sense of togetherness, make Rosenior so well liked by most of his own players, and make them want to run through a proverbial brick wall for him. Hey, who's cliché-ridden now? Whilst Rosenior is generous with his players and in allocating strategic time off, he has very little downtime in Strasbourg of his own. He lives in Alsace without his wife and children, who have stayed at their family home in Derbyshire for the time being. In fairness, he probably took one look at the frequency with which both Chelsea and Strasbourg sacked managers and thought better of it. Since the early 1950s, Strasbourg have had a change of management an extraordinary 52 times. That might not seem that strange from a modern perspective, but historically, when managerial tenures tended to be much longer, that is totally abnormal. I am unaware of any club, not even Watford, who have had more during that same time, and it speaks further to Strasbourg's chaos and volatility as a club over the years. Instead, Rosenior has chosen to live right outside of Strasbourg's modest training complex, which is itself right outside of their 26,109 capacity Stade de la Minnow. Strasbourg, incidentally, hope to complete a €160 million renovation of their stadium this summer, which will increase its capacity up to 32,000. That means that Rosenior figuratively, and almost literally, lives at the Strasbourg training ground, spending 10 or 11 hours a day there, obsessing over how to approach the club's next match. His housemate is Khalifa Cisse, a Frenchman that Rosenior has known for almost 20 years, having spent 3 years playing alongside him at Reading. Cisse also serves as Rosenior's translator while he undergoes intensive French language courses, and as one of his 3 assistant managers alongside Justin Walker and Jean-Marc Kuntz. Walker is Rosenior's most trusted ally, having been his assistant at Hull as well as working alongside him at Derby. Meanwhile, Kuntz, and that is his name, let's just get that out of the way, like Keller, is someone who knows Strasbourg intimately and brings both a sense of stability and an intimate knowledge of both Strasbourg and Ligue 1. Formerly an assistant for the Ivory Coast national team, Qatari club Al Jaish, and Ligue 1 rivals Rennes, Kuntz, who never played football professionally, previously spent 17 years at Strasbourg as B-team manager, assistant manager, and director of the club's youth department between 1995 and 2012. Since rejoining the club 5 years ago, he has worked under 6 different managers, providing a sense of continuity and a wealth of experience at an otherwise turbulent and incredibly youthful club. That was the one thing, or at least the primary thing, that I always felt Rosenior was lacking at Hull. Though undoubtedly a very promising manager, equally astute on the training ground and in press conferences, there was a notable dearth of experience both in Rosenior himself and within his backroom staff. That isn't the case at Strasbourg, thanks to Kuntz, which is why I have little surprise that things are going so well for Rosenior this season. One of the criticisms that I have seen of Strasbourg and of Rosenior, primarily from Hull City fans who are coping and seething about the fact that our Looney Tunes owner chose to sack him, it should be said, is that, as at Hull, he is only meeting expectations at a club with a rapidly increasing budget. But that isn't really true. It is true that Hull and Strasbourg's budgets have both increased, significantly, during Rosenior's time at the MKM Stadium and the Stade de la Minot, but he has still outperformed those budgets. At Hull, for example, Rosenior finished 7th with the 13th highest wage bill in the Championship last season, which, despite more than doubling from £12.7 to £29.6 million during Adjanil Ajala's first 3 seasons at the club, was still miles below any of the teams that Hull finished below in the race for the playoffs. Norwich, who finished 1 place and 3 points above Rosenior's side, had a wage bill of more than £50 million, literally 75% higher than Hull's. The accounts for this season haven't been published yet, but last season, Strasbourg's wage bill stood at €51 million. That is less than Norwich's, by the way, which was the 12th highest, or the 7th lowest, in Ligue 1, meaning that, if you wanted to be very reductive, Patrick Vieira very slightly underperformed last season, based upon Strasbourg's wage bill, in finishing 13th. That will have increased this season, maybe taking Strasbourg's wage bill up to the 9th highest in Ligue 1, but still miles behind Marseille and Monaco, who they are neck and neck with, and Lyon and Rennes, who they are above. Even if you factor in the 2 Chelsea loanees, Petrovic and Santos, who have been crucial for Strasbourg this season, it is clear that Rosenior and Strasbourg are significantly outperforming expectations. That is, of course, music to Blueco's ears, and it is little wonder that Rosenior is already being linked with the Chelsea job, but it also throws up some potential headaches. As things stand, so tight are the Premier League and Ligue 1 races for continental football, further complicated by Chelsea being in the Conference League final, that both clubs could still qualify for any of the 3 UEFA competitions next season. UEFA rules prohibit clubs with the same ownership structures from competing in the same UEFA competition, although they do it with all of the rigour of this guy. Whilst those rules are quite easily circumnavigated, as we saw firstly with RB Leipzig and Red Bull Salzburg over 5 years ago, they do require quite extensive reorganising, administrative adjustments, and sometimes even tweaks to actual ownership arrangements, something which would be quite difficult for Blueco, given the enormous amount of executive overlap between Chelsea and Strasbourg at this moment in time, and the fact that they probably didn't anticipate this conundrum coming quite so soon, owing to Strasbourg's overperformance this season. As far as Blueco are concerned, their so-called family of clubs doesn't stop at Strasbourg. Red Bull and City Football Group are repeatedly cited as the model by Bowley, who have 6 and 12 clubs each, across multiple continents, which Blueco hope to emulate. On the pitch, the arrangement has undoubtedly benefited Strasbourg up to this point. Their 2 best players arguably are Chelsea loanees, and their mightily impressive head coach was recruited owing to connections with senior figures at Stamford Bridge. Rosenior, and those around him, deserve immense credit for what they've achieved in footballing terms this season. But Strasbourg are the only professional football club in Alsace, a region of close to 2 million people with a distinct cultural identity. Full independence from France might be a stretch at this stage, though it has been talked about in the past, but independence from secondary status within an American-led multi-club ownership model ought not be too great of an ask. Strasbourg's kids have been a revelation this season, make no mistake, but it is a success tainted by the painful feeling that something more important than 3 points or European qualification has been lost. That is it for today's video, but thank you all very much, as ever, for watching. Hit the like button if you found it remotely interesting or informative, and as always, I really do mean even if only very remotely. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments, and of course, make sure that you are subscribed and have notifications turned on both for this channel, HITC Sevens, and also my second channel, Alfie Potsdamer, where I recently uploaded my 6th video, and the 7th and maybe even the 8th could be imminent. I don't want to overpromise and underdeliver, but I recently went to the Basque Country, and I think I might have got 2 videos there. So, you know, probably best to subscribe, I think, would be, well, my personal recommendation. Obviously. Weird if it wasn't. You can also support me additionally now if you are feeling especially generous and lovely via either the channel memberships on the Alfie Potsdamer YouTube channel, or even more preferably, because Google don't take 30%, via buymeacoffee.com/Alfie Potsdamer. There will be links to everything that I just mentioned down in the video description below, but until next time, have a brilliant day, and I'll hopefully see you shortly. Cheers.